The Desert Stranger. The twin suns blazed down on the endless golden dunes of Zalara, a desert planet where water was a thing of legend. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground cracked under the weight of centuries without rain. Among the vast emptiness, small settlements of the Ilari people clung to survival. These beings were lean, tall, and covered in pale scales that reflected the harsh sunlight. They thrived where most others would perish, but they lived in fear of one thing: water. Nehara, a young Ilari girl, was unlike the others in her village. While her people shunned the old tales of water worlds as myths or curses, she was drawn to them. She would sit for hours, staring at the horizon, dreaming of places with rivers, oceans, and rain. The idea of water terrified her, but it also filled her with curiosity. What did it feel like? Why did her people avoid it so much? One day, as she wandered the dunes searching for rare desert fruits, Nehara spotted a strange object on the horizon. It gleamed in the sunlight, metallic and unnatural. Her heart raced. Was it another sandstorm, or something worse? Against her better judgment, she approached cautiously, her long, clawed feet gliding across the sand. When she got closer, she saw it wasn't a storm or a mirage. It was a ship, smooth and silver, unlike anything she had ever seen. As she stood frozen, the ship's door hissed open, releasing a puff of cool air. A figure stepped out, wearing a strange suit and helmet. The being was shorter than the Ilari, with soft, pink skin and small, dark eyes. Nehara had never seen a creature like this before. The being removed its helmet, and to Nehara's surprise, it smiled. "Hello," it said in a warm voice. "I come in peace. My name is Ithan." Nehara's instincts screamed at her to run, but her curiosity kept her rooted in place. "You are not from this world," she said, her voice shaky. Ithan nodded, tucking his helmet under one arm. "That's right. I'm human, from a planet called Earth. I'm an explorer, and I mean no harm. May I ask your name?" Nehara hesitated. The elders always warned her about outsiders, especially those who spoke of other worlds. But Ethan's kind eyes and gentle demeanor made her feel safe. "I am Nehara," she said finally. "Why have you come here?" Ethan glanced around at the barren landscape. "I'm studying planets and their environments. Your desert world is fascinating, but I have to admit..." He trailed off, looking thoughtful. "It must be hard living in a place without water." The mention of water made Nehara's stomach twist. She narrowed her eyes. "Water is dangerous. It destroys everything it touches. Why would anyone want it?" Ethan chuckled softly, confusing her. "Where I come from, water is life. My planet is covered in it. Oceans, rivers, lakes, even rain falling from the sky. We swim in it, play in it, and drink it every day." Nehara took a step back, her scales bristling. "That's impossible. No one can survive in water. It is poison." Ethan's smile faded slightly, but his tone remained gentle. "It's not poison, I promise. Maybe your people have been taught to fear it, but water is not the enemy. In fact, it's beautiful. If you ever saw it, you might change your mind." Nehara crossed her arms, feeling both annoyed and intrigued. How could this stranger talk about something so dangerous with such warmth? "You speak of things that cannot be real." Ethan reached into a pouch on his suit and pulled out a small, clear container filled with liquid. "This is water," he said, holding it out to her. Nehara recoiled slightly but didn't run. She stared at the strange substance, watching it ripple and shine in the sunlight. It looked harmless, but her people's teachings echoed in her mind. Water destroys. Water kills. "Why would you carry such a thing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because it keeps me alive," Ethan said simply. "Here, you can hold it. It won't hurt you." Nehara hesitated. Her claws twitched at her sides as she debated whether to trust him. Finally, her curiosity won. She reached out and took the container, her hands trembling. The water inside was cool and moved like a living thing. It didn't burn her or harm her in any way. "It's strange," she admitted, her voice soft. "But still, I do not understand how anyone could swim in it." Ethan grinned. "If you come with me to Earth, I'll show you." Nehara froze. "Leave Zalara. That is forbidden. My people would never allow it." "Sometimes," Ethan said, his tone serious, "we have to see things for ourselves to understand them. If you come, you might discover that water isn't as scary as you think. Who knows? You might even enjoy it." His words stirred something in Nehara, a spark of rebellion, of longing. She looked out at the endless desert, a place she had known her entire life. Could there really be a world beyond this, a world filled with water? The idea was terrifying, but also exciting. "I will think about it," she said at last, clutching the container of water. Ethan smiled. "That's all I ask." As the human returned to his ship, Nehara stood alone in the desert, staring at the horizon. For the first time, the endless dunes felt smaller, and the idea of water seemed just a little less impossible. First steps into the unknown. Nehara didn't sleep that night. She lay on the roof of her family's sand-carved home, staring at the twin moons. The container of water sat beside her, its contents glinting faintly under the pale light. For years, she had dreamed of seeing other worlds, but the thought of actually leaving Zalara had always felt impossible. Until now. As the first rays of dawn painted the dunes, Nehara made her decision. Her heart raced as she walked toward the strange ship at the edge of her village. The elders watched from a distance, their expressions a mix of disapproval and fear. Whispers followed her. "She will bring ruin to us all," one said. "The outsider's lies will doom her," muttered another. But Nehara didn't stop. Ethan was waiting by his ship, adjusting the straps of a heavy pack. He looked up when he saw her, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Good morning. I wasn't sure you'd come." Nehara hesitated, her claws curling into the sand. "I do not trust you, human," she said bluntly. "But I want to see this world you speak of. If it is truly covered in water, I must know if it is real." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "Fair enough. I'll show you the truth, Nehara. But once we leave, there's no turning back until the journey is complete. Are you ready for that?" She took a deep breath, the weight of her choice pressing down on her. Behind her lay a life of familiarity and fear. Ahead was the unknown, full of dangers she couldn't imagine. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I am ready." The inside of Ethan's ship was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were smooth and glimmered like starlight. Strange lights blinked and pulsed, and the hum of the engines vibrated through the floor. Nehara touched the walls hesitantly, half expecting them to crumble like the sandstone of her home. Ethan laughed softly. "It's just metal, nothing to be afraid of. Take a seat. The journey might be a bit rough at first." Nehara did as he instructed, strapping herself into a chair. As the ship powered up, a low rumble filled the cabin. Her claws dug into the armrests as the floor tilted, and the desert outside the window began to shrink. Her people's village, the dunes, even the horizon, all of it vanished as the ship rose higher and higher. Then, for the first time in her life, Nehara saw Zalara from above. The planet's vast deserts stretched endlessly, broken only by the jagged peaks of long-dead volcanoes. "It's so small," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Ethan smiled as he guided the ship through the atmosphere. Perspective changes everything, doesn't it? Soon, the blackness of space surrounded them. Nehara stared wide-eyed at the stars, brighter and more numerous than she had ever seen from the surface. For a moment, she forgot about her fear of water. She even forgot about Ethan. The universe was vast, and she was just a small piece of it. As the ship hurtled toward its destination, Ethan began to explain. "Earth is a lot different from Zalara. We have rainforests, mountains, cities, and of course, oceans. The oceans cover most of our planet. They're deeper and more powerful than you can imagine. Nehara frowned. And you expect me to go near these oceans? I have never even seen a puddle. Ethan chuckled. One step at a time. First, we'll visit a lake, calm and shallow. It'll help you get used to water. By the time we reach the oceans, you'll be ready. The journey to Earth was faster than Nehara expected. The ship's windows dimmed automatically as they approached the planet, but Ethan adjusted the settings, allowing her to see. At first, she thought the planet was shrouded in some strange blue fog. But as they descended, she realized what she was seeing: water. It covered the surface in vast, shimmering expanses. White clouds swirled above it, and green patches of land peeked through the blue. Her claws tightened on her seat. It's real, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's all real. Ethan glanced at her. Welcome to Earth, Nehara. The ship landed near a quiet lake, surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently in the wind. The air smelled different, fresh and cool, with a hint of something she couldn't name. Nehara stepped out cautiously, her feet sinking slightly into the soft, damp ground. The lake stretched before her like a giant mirror, reflecting the sky. Its surface rippled with tiny waves, sparkling under the sunlight. Nehara stared, her heart pounding. This was nothing like the desert. Ethan stepped beside her, his voice calm and reassuring. This is water, Nehara. It's not dangerous. It's life. Are you ready to touch it? Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay. Slowly, she knelt at the edge of the lake and reached out. Her clawed fingers brushed the surface, and she gasped. The water was cool and smooth, nothing like she had imagined. It's alive, she whispered, pulling her hand back. Ethan laughed. Not quite. But it does move, and it's always changing. This is just the beginning, Nehara. There's so much more to see. She stared at the lake, her fear still present but mixed with something new. Wonder. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the water wasn't as terrifying as she had been taught. The first encounter with water. Nehara stood at the edge of the lake, her toes curling in the soft, damp soil. The alien substance stretched endlessly before her, rippling with each breeze. The human, Ethan, waded into the water without hesitation, the strange liquid lapping at his legs as if it welcomed him. She couldn't look away. The way the water clung to him, the way it moved, it was alive. It had to be. You're staring at it like it's going to swallow you whole, Ethan called out with a grin. Nehara's scales bristled. How can you be so calm? It could be dangerous. Ethan chuckled, stepping deeper into the lake until it reached his waist. It's just water, Nehara. It won't bite. He leaned back suddenly, his body disappearing beneath the surface. Nehara gasped, her heart racing. Ethan, she shouted, scanning the water. Had it taken him? Was this why her people feared it? Just as panic began to set in, Ethan's head popped back up, his hair slicked against his face. Relax, he said, laughing. I'm fine. This is called swooning. Humans do it all the time. Nehara's jaw tightened. You disappeared. How can that be safe? Ethan tilted his head, his expression softening. It's not about being safe. It's about trust. The water carries you if you let it. Look, come closer. I'll show you. Her claws dug into her palms as she hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay on dry land. Her people's warnings echoed in her mind. Water drowns. Water destroys. But another voice, smaller, quieter, urged her forward. Taking a shaky step, she approached the edge. The ground beneath her was wet and cool, a sharp contrast to the scorching sands of Zalara. She knelt, staring at her reflection in the shimmering surface. Just touch it, Ethan encouraged, his voice gentle. It's not as scary as you think. Nehara reached out, her hand trembling. When her fingers finally broke the surface, she gasped. The water was cool and smooth, slipping through her claws like liquid silk. It didn't burn or sting. It was soft. It's alive, she whispered, pulling her hand back. Ethan shook his head, laughing. No, it's not alive. It's just water. He extended a hand toward her. Come in. Trust me. Nehara stared at him, her fear battling with her curiosity. Slowly, she removed the woven sandals from her feet and stepped into the lake. The water hugged her ankles, sending a shiver up her spine. It felt alien and yet strangely inviting. Ethan backed up a few steps, keeping his hand outstretched. That's it. One step at a time. With each step, the water rose higher, wrapping around her legs and then her waist. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to keep going. Ethan's calm presence helped, his smile never wavering. When the water reached her chest, she froze. I can't go any deeper, she said, her voice shaking. You don't have to, Ethan said. Just float. Let the water hold you. Nehara frowned. How can it hold me? I'll sink. Ethan grinned. That's the secret. It won't let you sink if you trust it. Here, I'll show you. He moved closer, gently guiding her arms out so they rested on the surface of the water. Lean back, he said softly. She hesitated, every muscle in her body tensing. What if I go under? I'm right here, Ethan said. I won't let anything happen to you. Trust me. Taking a deep breath, Nehara closed her eyes and leaned back. For a moment, fear consumed her as she felt the water rise around her. But then, something incredible happened. She didn't sink. The water held her, cradling her like an unseen force. She opened her eyes, staring up at the sky. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever felt. Weightless, free, and calm. I'm floating, she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. Ethan laughed. Told you. See, water isn't the enemy. It's your friend. For the first time, Nehara began to understand what he meant. The water wasn't dangerous. It was beautiful. But just as she started to relax, a shadow passed beneath them. What was that? She asked, her voice rising with alarm. Ethan's smile faded. He scanned the water, his eyes narrowing. Stay calm, he said, his tone suddenly serious. The shadow moved again, faster this time. Nehara's heart raced as the water around her seemed to grow colder. Ethan, she whispered, her fear returning. What's down there? Before he could answer, the surface of the lake exploded, and a massive creature emerged, its jaws lined with razor-sharp teeth. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the shore. Out of the water. Now, he shouted. Nehara didn't need to be told twice. She stumbled toward the edge, the creature's roars echoing behind her. When they finally reached dry land, Nehara collapsed, gasping for air. She turned to Ethan, her eyes wide with terror. You said the water was safe. Ethan shook his head, his face pale. It usually is, but sometimes you're not the only one in it. As they stared at the lake, the creature sank back below the surface, leaving only ripples in its wake. For the first time, Nehara realized that water wasn't just beautiful. It was wild and unpredictable. Overcoming fear, Nehara sat on the rocky shore, her knees drawn to her chest, staring at the lake as the last ripples faded. The creature was gone, but its presence lingered in her mind like a shadow. She shivered, even though the sun was warm on her scales. You didn't tell me there were monsters in the water, she said, her voice sharp. Ethan crouched beside her, his expression apologetic. I didn't know that one was there. Not all lakes have creatures like that. You were unlucky. Unlucky? Nehara snapped, her claws scraping the rock beneath her. I almost died, and you call it unlucky. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. Look, I get it. That was terrifying. But you can't let one bad experience define everything. Not all water is dangerous, and not every encounter will be like that. Nehara glared at him. How can you be so sure? You told me to trust the water, and it nearly killed me. He sat beside her, his voice soft but firm. Because I spent my whole life in water. I know its dangers, but I also know its beauty. You got a glimpse of that before the creature showed up. Don't let fear take that away from you." She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the lake. The memory of floating, of feeling weightless and free, tugged at her thoughts. It had been wonderful, until it wasn't. Ethan stood and held out a hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Nahara frowned, back into the water. "No," he said with a small smile. "Not yet. Just trust me." Hesitating, she took his hand and let him guide her along the shore. They walked for a while in silence, the sound of their steps crunching against the rocky ground. The lake stretched endlessly beside them, shimmering under the sunlight, its surface calm and inviting again. Eventually, they came to a small inlet where the water was shallow and clear. Ethan knelt by the edge and gestured for Nahara to join him. "Look," he said, pointing into the water. Reluctantly, she knelt beside him and peered into the depths. Tiny fish darted between rocks, their scales catching the light like shards of crystal. Plants swayed gently with the current, their green tendrils dancing as though alive. "It's beautiful," Nahara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan nodded. "This is what I wanted to show you. Water isn't just a threat. It's a home, a world of its own. There's life in it, just like on land. It's not something to fear. It's something to respect." She watched the fish for a long moment, their movements hypnotic. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "You want me to go back in, don't you?" she said eventually. Ethan grinned. "Only if you're ready. But we'll stay here, where it's shallow and safe. No monsters, I promise." Nahara sighed, her claws tapping against the rock. Her fear still lingered, heavy and sharp, but she couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. She wanted to understand this strange world Ethan loved so much. "Fine," she said, standing. "But if something tries to eat me again, I'm leaving." "Deal," Ethan said, his grin widening. She stepped into the water, her heart pounding. It was cool against her feet, the smooth stones beneath her toes unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Slowly, she waded in, the water rising to her knees. Ethan followed, staying close. "You're doing great," he said encouragingly. Nahara shot him a glare. "I'm walking, not swimming." "Baby steps," he said with a shrug. He showed her how to crouch in the water, letting it surround her without panicking. It took time, but eventually, Nahara began to relax. The water didn't feel like an enemy anymore. It felt gentle. "You're getting it," Ethan said, his tone warm. "Now, try floating again. I'll be right here if you need me." She hesitated, her heart hammering in her chest. But she remembered the brief moment of freedom she had felt before, and it gave her courage. Taking a deep breath, she leaned back. The water caught her, holding her up as if it remembered her. Nahara opened her eyes, staring at the sky, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm doing it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Ethan laughed. "See, I told you water could be your friend." For the first time, Nahara believed him. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it no longer controlled her. She floated, letting the water carry her, and felt a strange sense of peace. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Danger in the deep. The scream echoed across the water, sharp and primal. Nahara shot upright from where she had been floating, her heart pounding. For a brief, horrifying moment, she thought the creature had returned. But then she realized it was Ethan. He wasn't screaming in fear. He was laughing. "Gotcha," he called, splashing water in her direction. His grin stretched wide as he floated a few feet away, clearly enjoying her startled reaction. Nahara scowled, crossing her arms. "You find this funny? I thought something had attacked you." Ethan chuckled, swimming closer. "Relax, Nahara. Not every splash means danger." Her glare softened as she watched him move effortlessly through the water, his arms and legs slicing through the surface with practiced ease. She invited his confidence. For him, the lake was a playground. For her, it was still a mystery. "How do you do that?" she asked, her curiosity outweighing her irritation. "Do what?" "Swim like that. You move as if you belong in the water." Ethan tilted his head, considering her words. "Humans learn to swim when we're young. It's natural for us. Like how you Ilari walk across burning sands without flinching." "I didn't have to trust the sand," Nehara muttered, glancing at the rippling water around her. Ethan smiled gently. "And yet you're here. You're floating. That's more than most people would do after what happened yesterday." She didn't respond, but his words warmed her. Despite her fear, she was beginning to feel a strange connection to the water. It was still foreign, but it no longer felt like an enemy. They drifted in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle lapping of the lake. The peace was almost enough to make Nehara forget her fear entirely. Almost. A sudden ripple broke the calm surface, sending a small wave toward them. Nehara stiffened, her instincts screaming. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice tight. "Did you see that?" He turned, his brow furrowing. "Probably just a fish," he said, but his tone was uncertain. The ripple came again, larger this time. A shadow moved beneath the surface, dark and massive. "That's no fish," Nehara said, her voice rising. Ethan's eyes widened. "Get to the shore," he said, his voice firm. "What is it?" she demanded, panic clawing at her chest. "I don't know, but we're not waiting to find out. Go." Nehara didn't need to be told twice. She turned and swam as best as she could, her movements clumsy but driven by fear. The shore felt impossibly far, every stroke an eternity. Behind her, the shadow grew closer. She could feel the water shifting, the presence of something huge approaching. Ethan grabbed her arm, his strokes strong and deliberate. "Keep going," he urged, pulling her along. They were almost to the shore when the surface of the lake exploded. A creature burst forth, its body sleek and serpentine, its jaws lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Nehara screamed, scrambling onto the rocks as Ethan pushed her forward. The creature snapped at the air, its powerful tail sending waves crashing against the shore. Ethan stumbled onto the rocks beside her, breathing hard. "That is not something I was expecting," he said, his voice shaky. Nehara stared at the creature, her heart hammering in her chest. "You said the water was safe. It usually is." Ethan shot back, keeping his eyes on the beast. The creature roared, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It lunged toward them, but its massive body couldn't leave the water. It thrashed, sending sprays of water high into the air. Ethan grabbed Nehara's arm and pulled her further up the rocks. "Stay back. It can't get out of the water." She didn't argue, her legs trembling as they climbed higher. From their vantage point, she could see the full size of the creature. Its body was covered in dark, glistening scales, and its tail stretched far into the lake. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. It's not from Earth, that's for sure." Nehara stared at him, her fear giving way to confusion. Not from Earth. Then where? A realization struck her, cold and sharp. "You mean, it came from my world?" Ethan didn't answer, but his silence was enough. The creature roared again, its frustration evident as it thrashed in the water. Finally, it sank back beneath the surface, leaving only turbulent waves behind. Nehara's breath came in ragged gasps as she turned to Ethan. "This is why my people fear water. We knew it was dangerous. We knew." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression somber. "You were right to be cautious, but this isn't normal. Creatures like that don't belong in lakes." "Then where does it belong?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. He stared at the water, his jaw tight. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." As they sat on the rocks, the lake's surface grew calm again, as if nothing had happened. But Nehara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Water wasn't just a mystery, it was a danger. And whatever had emerged from its depths was only the beginning. The wonders of the watery world. The roar of the waterfall drowned out all other sounds, a thunderous cascade that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Nehara's feet. She stood frozen, staring at the towering wall of water as it tumbled endlessly into the rocky pool below. Mist filled the air, cool and refreshing, clinging to her scales like a second skin. "This is impossible," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the deafening rush. Ethan stood beside her, his grin as wide as the horizon. "It's not just possible, it's real. Welcome to one of Earth's greatest wonders." Nehara turned to him, her eyes wide. How can something so powerful exist? How does it not destroy everything in its path? "That's the thing about water," Ethan said, his voice filled with admiration. "It's both gentle and fierce. It can nurture life, but it can also carve through mountains. It's unpredictable, and that's what makes it beautiful." Nehara took a hesitant step closer to the edge of the pool, her heart racing. The waterfall's roar filled her ears, and the sheer force of it made her feel small. She couldn't imagine anything surviving in such chaos. And yet, as she peered into the clear water below, she saw life. Fish darted through the currents, their movements quick and graceful. Brightly colored plants swayed with the flow, their delicate fronds unbroken despite the relentless force of the falls. "How?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on the scene before her. "How can they live here?" "Adaptation," Ethan said, crouching beside her. "Life finds a way, even in the most extreme conditions. That's the magic of water. It creates opportunities for things to grow, even where you'd least expect it." Nehara reached out, letting the mist collect on her fingertips. It was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the dry, oppressive heat of Zalara. She had never felt anything like it before. Ethan stood and held out his hand. "Come on, we're going closer." Her head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with alarm. "Closer? Are you insane? That thing could sweep us away." He chuckled, shaking his head. "We're not going under the falls, just near the edge. Trust me, you'll want to see this." Reluctantly, Nehara followed him, her steps cautious on the slick rocks. The roar of the falls grew louder, and the mist thickened, soaking through her clothing. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but she forced herself to keep moving. When they reached the edge of the pool, Ethan stopped and gestured for her to look. Nehara hesitated, her claws gripping the rock beneath her. Slowly, she crept forward and peered over the edge. The pool wasn't just water. It was alive. Schools of fish swam in synchronized patterns, their scales reflecting the sunlight like tiny prisms. Brightly colored plants bloomed along the rocky bottom, their vibrant hues standing out against the clear blue. Small creatures scuttled along the edges, their delicate forms perfectly adapted to the environment. "It's beautiful," Nehara said, her voice filled with awe. Ethan smiled. "I told you, water isn't just a force, it's a world. It supports life in ways you can't even imagine." She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Is this what all water is like? Full of life and beauty?" "Not always," he admitted. "Some waters are barren, and others are dangerous. But even in the harshest conditions, you'll find life trying to survive. That's the power of water. It's a source of endless possibilities." Nehara looked back at the pool, her fear slowly being replaced by curiosity. For the first time, she felt a flicker of understanding. Water wasn't just a threat. It was complex, unpredictable, and alive in its own way. Ethan stepped into the shallow edge of the pool, the water swirling around his ankles. He turned back to her, extending a hand. "Come on. You've floated, you've swum, and now it's time to really feel the magic of this place." She hesitated, her claws flexing nervously. "What if I can't handle it?" "You've already handled more than most people would," Ethan said, his tone encouraging. "You faced your fear and made it this far. You can do this." Taking a deep breath, Nahara stepped into the water. The cool liquid surrounded her feet, and the sensation was startling but not unpleasant. Slowly, she waded deeper, the water rising to her knees, then her waist. Ethan guided her toward a spot where the water was calmer, away from the fall's main force. "Close your eyes," he said. "Feel it." She closed her eyes, letting the water flow around her. It tugged at her gently, its currents swirling and shifting like a living thing. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt connected. "This is incredible," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Ethan grinned. "And this is just the beginning. Wait until you see the ocean." Nahara's eyes snapped open, a mixture of excitement and apprehension flickering across her face. "The ocean? It's like this," Ethan said, gesturing to the waterfall and pool. "But bigger. Much, much bigger." The thought both thrilled and terrified her. But as she stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the waterfall, she realized something important. She wasn't ready to stop learning.